well as what you see of Southeast Asia. I'd love for you to briefly introduce yourself.
Happy to be here. Myself, I'm Arne, founder of Parcel Perform. Parcel Perform is a experience merchants and marketplaces worldwide to manage the customer experience post-checkout. We do this by integrating with a lot of different carriers and integration partners and ensure that we can deliver the best for our part. This is one of our kind of mottos and mantras that we feel that everyone deserves a great experience, and I think that's what we want to do as Parcel Perform to deliver it kind of across the globe.
Maybe. Awesome. How did you? Awesome. How did you, get started as an entrepreneur? You were a consultant, you were the CEO of ZALORA, you were a GM at Singpost. So kind of share us a little bit how that journey worked out.
Okay, no problem. I started my profession with a consultant back in out of Germany, and at that time, I think my work focused around the mobile telecom sector. There was a time when 3G and LTE. I think it was a very exciting space. There was a lot of growth, ideas around. I spent the first my professional life working in Europe, Middle East. This topic. So nevertheless, I think the sector in established. So I really look for new challenges and kind of relocated to Singapore to work with customers here in this part of the world. So I spent time working in the Philippines and Indonesia, Thailand, also working on the mobile telecom sector. And I think that was a great experience. But I think by that time, we already realized, telecoms, every flat rate, it became. So that's why I was looking for new challenges. And that's when the opportunity with ZALORA came around. Idea of exploring e-commerce, which at that time was still a very, very early. And so I loved the opportunity to jump into this and being part of the e-commerce business. So we did that with ZALORA, and I was with ZALORA kind of setting up the first, I think, 8 markets, literally getting exposure to seeing kind of how e-commerce works. Singapore, but on the other hand, like Indonesia up to Taiwan. So there was a great e-commerce system evolving, and also see how each of these markets were different. So I think with that, one of the things that kind of came interest area around e-commerce logistics. One of the key drivers for success in e-commerce that we very early on realized. So with that, I base and then joined Singpost, and then a little later DHL eCommerce, to really focus on e-commerce logistics and how it can help e-commerce merchants to deliver a better service. Quite a bit of time with DHL eCommerce. I think it was a great opportunity to learn the logistics side from the perspective of a logistics player. Services for delivery services on top. But I think one of the key lessons that we learned speaking to many e-commerce merchants was, hey, we work with one carrier because we have so service levels, products, big products. Some people want fast, some want end up working with logistics. That even if you deliver the most amazing stuff, still go and work. And one of the things that always was a big complexity driver and a kind of a little bit of a problem for their customer experience to work with customers and need to across all those different players they work with. And there was no platform in the market that easier. So that's when we said, hey, this is not a problem we can solve within DHL. This is something we have to solve outside DHL, because carrier independent. That's when the idea is let's do it. Let's try it out. This is the right time to get started on this. And yeah, I think so far, I think the direction that our timing was about right.
Amazing. And, I think a lot of interesting dynamics here. When we zoom in, you were a management consultant for such a long time. Why did you decide to leave management consulting to take on this entrepreneurial, founding role, right, as the founding CEO of ZALORA? What was that decision like?
If you go into management consulting for the early years, your work is all about finding solutions for customers and their particular business problems. A lot being functional domains. So you work on product topics, you work on tech topics, procurement parts of the world and different businesses. So it's super exciting. It gives you like a unique perspective in this world with exposure into so many different areas. I think it's a great learning journey for anyone coming out of school, wanting to explore what business life is like. So the more senior consulting, then you start managing your own projects. You get a kind of teams. You work more complex settings. You have a broader kind of with multiple teams. You build up a skill set, but it's a kind of the consulting job moves away from problems into exploring kind of opportunities to sell more projects to the customer. So when it turns from solving this problem into like selling kind of the problem solving, that's not what as much. So that's when I said, hey, I learned what I needed to learn to understand the business world, how to run kind of solve problems and run teams that solve problems. That's when I wanted to go, hey, to the industry to think myself rather than just being to do it for others.
Amazing. And what's interesting is that you're kind of like shuffle back, right? You go back to being an operator in a larger organization. So what was that experience like? Because I think I think people normally kind of make that shift and they stay there. So what was driving that decision to say like, hey, I want to double down in this vertical called logistics and e-commerce, but I would like to do this in a larger player?
I think kind of at that time in my professional career, I think I have seen experienced. Want to go to the other side because you want to add that experience to your portfolio or to your CV. One of the things when we set up ZALORA, as much as it was an exciting journey, I would say with scaling, and I think at that time kind of Rocket Internet it was a very unique place to be working. So there's a lot of like unique experience you get where you also sometimes feel, hey, a little bit more of a structured environment might be useful at times. And I think that's when I also said, hey, I really logistics vertical. I like to have a little bit of more environment where we built substance kind of from scratch. Said, hey, this is now the right time for me. First of all, in e-commerce logistics space, and in a more kind of in a bigger organization where you build services kind of more methodic. So obviously, then after for a while, I think it's of course you miss the entrepreneurial kind of side of things, decision making. The kind of flexibility you have because very different decision-making kind of logics. We weren't part of the headquarters. We were like kind of sitting in Asia, where the headquarters in Europe. So there's a lot of complexities or red tape that you deal with. So entrepreneurial that I had. So and that's where I think when the time came and I said, hey, really have this idea and opportunity that we could be pursuing with Parcel Perform, that I also had the confidence where I said, hey, let's do it. Also get back to this entrepreneurial, and it's also kind of a different if you start a company where you have to basically build the initial product, kind of find supporters. Whereas I think starting a kind of a business with obviously in the setting of Rocket Internet with all the capital and the pressure, it's a very different and I appreciated kind of starting it the normal way as a founder, where you just build the business, find supporters, and then bit by bit enhance everything, you validate product market fit, you find your first customers. I think that was a very, very valuable we went through. It wasn't easy all the time, but I think it's an experience I don't want to miss.
And you shared that you decided to specialize and because you liked and loved e-commerce logistics. And that's an interesting vertical to be interested in, right? Because when I was a consultant, I got to see consumer, B2B, telecoms as well, heck, hardware as well. And it's interesting to see you specialize that across not only multiple roles but also multiple domains, right? So lots of folks are passionate about, I don't know, creator economy, right, or VR or gaming. I think that's easy, but what was it about e-commerce logistics that made it compelling for you?
One of the things that we realized when setting up here in Southeast Asia, one of the key metrics for success, and I very much believe, is that you manage this well and everything around it. So logistics is not just A to B. Whole experience after checkout. For us, I think we realized we just wanted kind of e-commerce logistics was just there to just make it happen, so the customer gets the product. But we were more focused on bringing a new customer, new business. So we needed to excite people, the right products, sorted out. But I think very apparent already at that time is in the long run, I think the customer needs to trust the product. It's about retention, about kind of making it part of their routine to buy from you as a store. And I think that's where it plays an important role. Doesn't kind of is not even aware of the marketing channel they came to know about the shop. What they essentially will remember is the experience they had, and that's very much linked to the post-purchase process as well as the logistics. So I think that's where I believe, hey, for the I think this is one of the most important domains. Sales need to do products. For what I feel, this is the area also where a lot, not very many people spend kind of the time to think through how can we excel in logistics, how we can excel in the e-commerce experience, and that's where I felt, hey, this is a domain where I can make a difference, and that's where we. Is for me the company, the business that try. Make life better for consumers. In the process, build a sizable business that we can be proud of.
Awesome. And as a founder, did you find obviously you had all this domain expertise that was relevant for the company you're building? Did you find anything relevant or transferable for your time as a McKinsey consultant that made it easier to operate either as a founder or CEO in time to come?
So I think the learning from being a consultant is less oh, I learned marketing or I learned this or that. I think it's mostly problems. So to be effective as a consultant is to basically be able to face with problems, to have a very methodical, structured way of solving it, bring the organization or the team that along, make sure that you build rapport behind the solution. So these are all skills that are not specific particular functional domain or any particular problem, but it's a methodology. And I think that has useful throughout my career, whether you're solving problems in your customer companies as a consultant, or whether you start your own business, whether you work for a big corporate. The kind of the process or the tool set that kind of learn. That's very useful, and I think that's where I'm also incredibly grateful for that experience. To the context of so many organizations, and I think that contributed to me being successful in many of the kind of opportunities afterwards.
And what would you say are the things that did not transfer well to being a founder CEO? Because I went through that same experience, right? I was a consultant at Bain, and I became a founder, and I realized I had to unlearn some stuff, right? Or just, it doesn't work, right? It doesn't fly. So what would you say are some of the things that, stopped working for you, or that you had to consciously choose to change?
No, I think one of the things that you need to get used to is you need to be super granular. As a consultant, you also you're paid to be high level, to inspire people strategically. Okay for other people to sort out the details. That's obviously not an approach that works well as a startup founders. It's not a business. Literally, you're not just there for the thought process and the great ideas. You actually need to get stuff done, and I think that's part of the journey you have to go through. And is literally in the company. There was the time in the past that I had to do it. We just hired a CFO for Parcel Perform, but literally I did every part of the job myself, from building the model, kind of paying people at the end of the month, kind of setting up the accounting software in the first place, and I think experience, and this is the stuff you need to unlearn being a consultant. It's like, okay, it's great to have the strategy ideas, but I think it's all about being granular, being able to a functional domain in. I think that's one thing you need to do differently than you probably used to. And I think one of the stories that were sold in the Rocket Internet days. It's like, okay, strategy is the thing that you do for 5 minutes under the shower in the morning, and the rest of execute. Exaggeration. I think that's kind of emblematic of the unlearning process. Some people.
I think that's a really good transition that I really empathize with myself, right? Because you can make the nicest whiteboard and the deck and source plan, but the honest reality is what actually gets done, and what actually gets done is often you have to do it yourself with your co-founder at best, and you have to divide and conquer. Anything else that you think was part of the untraining process? I guess one thing that I do think of that I had to get untrained of is like, I think data maybe collection. So McKinsey and Bain is very much like these large reports, macros, and I think as a founder, very much talking to the customer, right, and getting the feedback from them directly, right, which is a very different level altogether. Anything else that comes up to mind about stuff that you have to untrain, or you notice that management consultants struggle when they transition to becoming a founder?
Now, I think one thing that I think was a great learning process for me is tech. So as a management consulting company, the most, I think obviously that has changed in the last 10 years, but it wasn't the most tech savvy space, and you didn't have to. all about big ideas. Kind of you get incredibly savvy in building PowerPoint presentations and Excel models, but I think really understanding technology, kind of software development processes, that wasn't something that you can pick up or easily kind of learn in that kind of environment. So I worked with mobile telecom companies, so I was kind of familiar on how the networks work and how to roll them out and what the technology is behind it. But the notion of technology and software development, and that was entirely new for me. So this was just kind of a learning through ZALORA, and then kind of more work around the logistics industry. That's a kind of a knowledge I think I acquired then. And even starting Parcel Perform, first few years was very much a tech learning journey for me. And I think that's where I think from background, a business background, I did a Ph.D. in economics. So this is also not the domain that's most tech savvy. I think that's one thing. So tech is one. The other area is kind of data and the capability. Because obviously at the time, kind of when I kind of started as a consultant in 2005, I think what is now called data science and machine learning AI was called statistics. So very much similar things, but a lot less exciting and sexy. But I think that they're kind of really understanding and embracing the notions on what data can do, how you set up a business, kind of an opportunity leverage as much data as possible. I think this is something you also have to learn by doing. I think there's now a lot of courses in university, etc., that kind of already ingest you with the right mindset for it, but that wasn't the case at the time, and frankly, not even in consulting in the kind of late 2000s. So data was you collect in order to get stuff done. It was hardly a purpose by itself. And I think that's where I think for me personally, that was one of the great learning journeys. Somebody who was quite proficient in statistics to now embrace and understand kind of what can do. That I think it's models. It's like literally a coding discipline right now. I think that's the great learning. Not able to do it myself. I think I believe it was great to get an exposure to be understand how this can be leveraged successful.
There's a lot of stuff to learn at McKinsey, but also stuff to unlearn, right, as being a founder. And I think what you've done and built over time is this large logistics business in terms of being thoughtful about the category and space. Do you feel like Southeast Asia, what else is there to build in terms of e-commerce logistics from your perspective, using these skills?
We are a technology platform, so we're not building logistics businesses. Also incredibly hard, so I'm happy I don't have to do that. No, but I think if I look at it from the perspective of a consumer, there's still a lot to be desired when it comes to e-commerce. So when we think about e-commerce, it's not just, you order something and you get it. That obviously works by now. It wasn't the case in 2012 when we started, but I think by now, I think everyone can order kind of literally anything and eventually get there. We have seen also over the last 2 years with the pandemic is now the next step for e-commerce is to be seamlessly integrating in everyone's daily life. So basically replacing patterns kind of going shopping. I think groceries is an important one where you're like, okay, how do you organize your life? How do you get stuff? How do you kind of make this as seamless as possible for yourself? And I think that's where there's a lot of kind of opportunities to make e-commerce more accessible for consumers and easier to use. And I think we're seeing and we're getting inspiration from different geographies. One important element is delivery times. So if you order something, it's I think on average still takes like a week because stuff gets shipped from. Delivery times are still very unpredictable. If you do the same, let's say in Korea or Japan, which is always a great example, 4 hours later it shows up. And it's not because you ordered like a super expensive same-day service. It's because that's the norm. And I think then if you know that whatever you order comes 4 hours later, I think you think about e-commerce and shopping through this channel very, very differently. And I think that transition, I think a lot of markets and consumers still have to make. Because I think right now we're also trained to know, okay, if I want something faster, I need to pay more. But I think in those markets, they turned around that logic. It's like the means using the same infrastructure and asset more efficiently. So it actually becomes cheaper. And because you can use the same truck 24 hours or the same sorting center for 24 hours instead of just once a day. And the whole industry, and that's needs to also rethink the way they think about e-commerce logistics, is saying, hey, for this to really very change the way consumers interact with the service, I think the logistics industry needs to make that kind of transition. Collection points, because I think one example I always say, hey, 50 years ago, if you got a letter, the postman came to you. So that was okay because they only had God knows, you get a letter every week or something. So then they realized, okay, now that the customer is getting so many letters, it's kind of inefficient. So they started building post boxes, because that wasn't the case in the very early days. And I think we're now getting to the same stage for parcels. Instead of giving it every parcel by itself, I think some households get 2-3 parcels a day. On average, that's not a smart way of doing it. So I think that's where locker boxes, collection points, or even in bigger condominiums, apartment buildings, to have parcel lockers in every house entrance. I think this is the future to really make it part of your normal life. You collect your mail in the post box, and you collect your parcels in the parcel box that are next to it. And I think that's Singapore making important steps where they have roll out a big parcel locker infrastructure. But even that, you can get a lot more granular, and that's how you really start changing patterns for consumers to really be excited for e-commerce and adopt it in a very, very different way. And that's where we believe a lot of the growth will come from over the next few years.
You're sharing some really important truths about the e-commerce logistics system. Are there any myths or misconceptions about e-commerce logistics that you'd like to debunk or shed some light on?
Any myth? I think one of the interesting things is I think the growth. First of all, e-commerce logistics technically grows faster than e-commerce itself. I think that's what a lot of people don't even realize, because the average order sizes goes down. We have a shift towards marketplaces. Marketplaces basically pool things from different sellers, so that they're technically more and more parcels being sent. If you order more things, you don't necessarily pool orders anymore, that you order 15 things at one time. You just order one if you like it, then you order the next, and then the next. So e-commerce and the number of shipments grows much, much faster than e-commerce. So that's one of the key things. Also, that's quite an eye-opener for us in the space. The other is a few years back, everyone thought, okay, e-commerce logistics is dominated by 3-4 big players per incumbent players, always going to win in this space. What we're seeing in the industry is the whole now fragmenting. I think we counted in Singapore, there are companies that can deliver parcels to your doorstep, and this over time. So what we are seeing that there is a lot more competition, a lot more innovative services coming up, and it's not an industry that is like dominated by one or two big players, which is fantastic news for consumers. Not so great news if you're the dominating the market previously. But I think that's what we're seeing, and this is getting really exciting for consumers. So, and I think there are a lot of new trends coming out of it. And the myth that everyone said, oh, yeah, this is a market, we have players, and nothing's going to come about in terms of change and innovation. I think we're seeing a lot of innovation there, and I think there's still a lot more to come. I think the other area is like about consumer kind of expectations. So I think one that we said is about delivery time. If you look at parcel delivery time, some carriers, that doesn't necessarily mean that their trucks drive faster. Yeah, I think it's a lot about them organizing themselves so the parcel doesn't sit in a particular hub waiting for too long. So, and I think this is, I think I mentioned it earlier, it's the myth that something that's delivered faster needs to be more expensive. It's not. It's actually, it can be more efficient. You don't need that much space to store the parcels while they wait around. So it get it done fast. I think that's an important thing also for everyone to realize, and for the carriers to realize. Being fast is not just kind of a premium service, but actually what they need to do in order to be successful in the long run. And I think the last element is from the consumer experience point of view. Delivery is not the only thing that matters. I think a lot of consumers are now they don't want to organize their life around e-commerce. They want their e-commerce to organize around their life. So there's a lot of services coming up, particularly in Europe and the US, about redirecting deliveries, rescheduling deliveries, kind of easy kind of acceptance, returns. So there's I think this paradigm shift that you have to organize yourself to get your parcels. I think it's already happening at very, very fast pace. And I think that will be a big change for the industry, that they say, hey, we need to work around what the consumer wants to have, rather than dictating, oh, this is our service, take it or leave it. And I think that's a big learning, sometimes painful learning for the industry, but something we are very excited about, because we as a business thrive for many players coming up, from consumers being demanding about their experience. That's kind of the lifeblood for us at Parcel Perform, and that's why we're exciting to be in this space.
Amazing. I think what's interesting is that you mentioned how the market doesn't trend towards a single player, but to more fragmentation. That's confusing because one of the advantages, of course, is economies of scale, right? And so you would think that with logistics, the more packages there are, the more volume there is, economies of scale will become more and more important, right? And therefore, you should trend towards the largest players who have the most economies of scale. I mean, that's at least one way to think about it. So what's wrong with this mental model, or what's wrong? Is it because they're not able to compete on innovation? Is it because e-commerce is a whole new category? Could you share a little bit more about why economies of scale is insufficient for the incumbents to hold on to their market share?
No, so the economies of scale end as soon as whatever the vehicle is that you use to ship the parcels is full. So if you go outside of Singapore, if you go to cities like Jakarta, Bangkok, Manila, a lot of the delivery done via motorcycles. So, and you can put big boxes on the motorcycles, but there's a physical limitation on what you can do there. So if you basically have parcels for a motorcycle to be relatively efficient delivering parcels, having double the amount of parcels also just means that you have double amount of motorcycles, but you don't have many advantages anymore. Because they literally fit in, 20, 30 parcels. Then you have to go back to the hub to get the next load. So you don't have these efficiency gains anymore. If you go to cities Singapore, you don't use motorcycles for delivery, you need vans. But with vans, you also have the same logic. There at some stage, you don't fit any more parcels in that van. Particularly pooling parcels to locker boxes or like parcel shops, and you drop off 50 parcels there. So you probably, if you really push it, you get maybe 500 kind of parcels in a big van. But then you go to 10 different locker boxes, and then literally then you have to go back and get more parcels. So the notion that kind of the size of the vehicle kind of efficiency, I think is something that only becomes apparent over the last few years. And that's where I think anyone who's able to fill that van efficiently has a good business to work with. And the efficiency gains beyond that are relatively minor. And I think that's the kind of element that's fueling this fragmentation, where you say, hey, there's a sufficiently large element for this particular service level, or kind of for this geographical area, that say, hey, it's worth having another carrier, particularly if that carrier operates in a much better cost structure because it's much has better technologies.
That's really interesting, because what you're saying is that economies of scale does exist, but it exists at different layers, right? And some layers are more amenable to economies of scale as an advantage, and some areas, some geographies that have those layers just don't have that same level. And so actually being thoughtful about what layer it is interesting. And I think in that world, when you think about the world, obviously you see so many aggregators, right? So they're trying to say, okay, all these logistics companies, like you said, and you can't afford to differentiate yourself from them, they're going to be fragmented because of these differing levels of economies of scale. How do you see that transition for aggregation as well? Because there are so many different aggregator players as well, right? Shippo, for example, Parcel Perform, so forth. So how do you see aggregation? Is it also going to be fragmented because there's going to be different layers of point of view, or how do you see that playing out?
So I think that there are two very distinct business models on this aggregation layer. One is I think what we call resellers. So you basically you buy a logistics service from like 5-10 different carriers, get some rate cards and resell it to other players, so they can just buy all of it from you. And that's a great business model, particularly for smaller merchants who don't want to have like 5 different contracts, and with of volumes, they also get better rates than any particular merchant would get. So I think that's a very valid business model, and that's kind of interesting for carriers to work with, also because it lowers the cost to serve, because you don't want to contract with that many small players just for a few 2 or 3 shipments a day. That's simply not worth it. So they appreciate those resellers to just take over that part of the product, just kind of consolidate volumes. Nevertheless, kind of the carriers understand that this is a bit dangerous, because once rates, they can undermine kind of the rates that the carrier themselves gives to their bigger customers. So that's where I think at the moment a customer gets bigger, they will start kind of work directly, because they get better rates from them. And that's when the second category of aggregators, which Parcel Perform belongs to, comes into play, where we are not kind of putting ourselves in the commercial relationship between the carrier the merchants. We're an unbiased platform towards our customers. We don't care, or like we don't get involved in which carrier is the one that they work or partner with. What we just make that process of partnering a lot easier, so they can integrate through our platform. We take care of all the technical complexities, data transfer, back and forth with the carrier. That's all handled by our platform. They just kind of tell us who they work with, but they agree on the pricing. This is also a business model which I think the carriers also appreciate a lot more, because they don't lose control over their rate cards, their commercial. We just make it easier for the merchant to work with the 10, sometimes 20 carriers that may be relevant for them. And for their customers, and kind of a business model that works with bigger customers in the enterprise segment, and I think that's where it gets also interesting, because those merchants are bigger, and they probably operate cross-border. They have more complex supply chains. They have to do cross-border returns, and that's where companies like ours, Parcel Perform, is thriving, because that complexity would otherwise be very, very difficult to manage if you just have to build everything in-house.
Amazing. On that note, could you share with us a time that you personally have been brave?
Well, I think for me personally, the time I felt very brave. At that time, we didn't know yet, was when we took the decision to start Parcel Perform. For me personally, you work in a big company, obviously you have a decent salary. I was married, we had kids. I was 36 years old. So normally that's not kind of a time when you're at ease to take a decision. Oh, hey, I let go of all my salary and start a business without knowing, okay, whether it's going to work, when it's going to work. I think that required quite a lot of conviction, and I think at that moment I felt brave to really take that decision. Of course, we were excited about the space. There was a bit of the push element, wanting to go back to the entrepreneurial journey, but I think the opportunity cost. I think it was a brave decision at that time, because now we know, kind of 6 years into the journey, we have a very sizable business. We have a market. The business model has been validated. The product has been validated. Now, in hindsight, one can say, hey, this was kind of a no-brainer for to begin with. But at that time, it was a very brave decision. I think, I'm happy it turned out that way, but it wasn't certain at that time. So I think that's when I felt very brave.
You mentioned something interesting, which was that you didn't really know how brave you were at that point of time. And now you know that it was a very brave moment, right? So could you share a little bit more about why you feel that way?
No, because I think I'm somebody who I think that's probably important to be a founder, because if you're not excited about your own product, it's hard to convince any investors or any customers of the same product. But you also know kind of a level of excitement or being excitable is a bias that you have, which probably makes you a lot more brave in taking risky decisions, which is important to be a founder. But I think at that time, probably I didn't feel as much of a very risky decision, because we had like 100% conviction that this is going to fly. Without that, I probably wouldn't have done it. In hindsight, looking at the market, some companies who tried their luck in the same space, starting earlier or later, kind of failed because the timing wasn't right. So if you look at it from the perspective of hindsight, I think it was quite a brave decision, because I think there's a lot of elements that come to it. Obviously, the opportunity needs to be there, the timing needs to be right. There's an element of luck, meeting the right customers at the right time, meeting the right investors at the right time. So I very much didn't realize these elements when taking the decision. I probably wouldn't have taken that decision if I would have known that this is all about timing and luck, rather than just hard work. Because hard work, I was sure we will and we can and we will put in, but it's not everything that matters. And I think that's we realize it in hindsight, but you also look back. A bit naive at the time when taking the decision.
Amazing. On that note, I'd love to kind of wrap things up by kind of synthesizing the three big themes. The first, of course, is thank you so much for sharing, I think, your experience being at McKinsey, but also choosing to become an operator at ZALORA and being a founder eventually. And what were the skills that transported well? And also some of the untraining that you had to do in terms of a bias to action, in terms of data, in terms of what actually goes on in the business of building a technology company. Also, thank you so much for sharing about I think why you're passionate about e-commerce logistics, and also a lot of the misconceptions and myths around it. Especially, what I interested was to hear was about how logistics scales faster than e-commerce, because of average order value and how the competitive market is still very fragmented. So these are all great learnings. Lastly, I think I really enjoyed, some of the hindsight about how brave you were in retrospect versus not feeling like you were brave and feeling like it was no-brainer when you first found it, and how some of that naivete helped, insulate you and help, expedite you in terms of making a decision whilst you were a 36-year-old dad and husband, and choosing to build something. And it's awesome that things have worked out over the past 6 years in terms of luck, circumstance, timing, and as well as your own hard work and expertise. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
No, thanks for having me. Very much enjoyed the conversation.